It looks like everything's good to go. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to our June movie club. Um, this month we watched Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which is a 1969 Western movie, kind of a buddy film. Um, so, let me go ahead and do a little bit of housekeeping up front here, just so that if anybody out there is watching live or if you're watching on the replay, we have a limited number of seats available for our monthly media clubs, but you're always allowed to participate. If you are watching us live and you want to be a part of the discussion, we do see those comments, whether you're on Facebook or on YouTube. If you're watching it on the replay, I still get notifications that there are comments, at least for the Facebook group. So I'd still be more than happy to discuss any of our current or past picks. We also have two other groups. We have a listening club, which we will be having our discussion of Speak for Yourself by Imogen Heap tomorrow night at 7 p.m. And we have a quarterly book club that will be meeting at the end of July. We're reading Leonardo da Vinci by Walter Isaacson. There's not a date for that. We pick our dates based on the availability of the people who want to participate in the discussions. So if you ever want to be a part of any of our discussions, absolutely just reach out to me and we'll announce our next picks on the 1st, which I believe is this coming Saturday. So that is my little upfront spiel. I think that's everything.
We also, if you guys enjoy what we do here and you would like to take part, you can join in on our clubs by joining and becoming a member of Dragonfly Arts and Creatives Collective group, and let us know that you would like to participate, and we can see if we can get you in on any of our panels. We also have a Pinterest that, or sorry, not a Pinterest. Somebody's got noise. Who's noisy?
I don't know.
Not Pinterest. I meant Patreon. We have a Patreon. You can join to get exclusive perks and stuff and just support the work that we do here at Dragonfly. It's patreon.com/Dragonfly Arts Group, I think. And you can join for as low as $2.
We can put the links to that in the either the description or on the comments section, just for easy access there.
Yeah.
If you want to also help us pick the next choices, we have a submission form for suggestions, and I can also put a link to that in the either descriptions or comments. I haven't quite decided yet. But anyways, on to the movie of the hour, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. I always want to start off these calls by just like asking, have you guys seen this movie before?
Yep.
Did you rewatch it before coming to the club?
Yep.
I actually had never seen this movie before. So it was a first time watch for me.
Oh.
Maybe it's one of those things of I didn't grow up in the United States, so maybe just like the classic Western just went over my head. But how'd you like it?
Watching through the second time, I liked it. I liked it more this time than I remember, and I liked it the first time I saw it. So, but yeah, I mean, this is one of those classic American, 70s, although it came out in 69, but you kind of associate it with the 70s films that I think I had gone through like a phase in college where I was like, I gotta watch all the classics because I was in film school at the time. So
I think we've had this discussion of I also went through that, but then I quickly realized that I watched a bunch of movies, but I didn't actually watch any of them. So like it falls into the category of like, I'm pretty sure I saw that, but did I really see it?
yeah. I don't think this was required watching is the point. Because in my film appreciation class, we watched a lot of like classic American and some foreign film, but I don't think this was on the list. I think I watched this independently of like wanting to be abreast of all the old American, kind of pre-aughts, pre-millennium classics.
Yeah, I've seen this a bunch of times. I think my parents rented it when I was young, possibly in high school or something. But yeah, I watched it again a few days ago, and I liked it a lot. I think, for one thing, the cinematography was better than I remembered. But yeah, and we can get into that. But like the cinematographer won an Oscar, um, and the song won an Oscar. It won a bunch of other Oscars, and it was nominated for even more. So it like, um, but yeah, I this time I liked it a bunch, and I was kind of surprised to read that critics at the time gave it mixed reviews, like including Roger Ebert, who gave it a 2.5 out of 4. Um, and yeah, apparently, like, um, yeah, just a bunch of them seem to have trouble with the pacing and stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, the short answer is I liked it.
Tim, you're on mute.
There we go. Yeah, one of my all-time favorite films. I don't even know how many times I've watched it. Um, it, yeah. Anything else I could say is probably more appropriate during the full discussion. But yeah, I absolutely love this film.
I mean, we can just get started on the discussion. I don't really like have a bunch of questions or anything. A lot of times I kind of just find interesting facts or try to look into it, but the cinematography is amazing. It looks great. It deals with like contrast. It's not afraid to go dark. And I spent a really long time trying to find more notes on the actual filming of it and couldn't find anything. And it's very upsetting. So if anybody else has like more details on like the actual filming process or any resources for me out there where I can like look into that, because most of it is
This movie was made for $6 million.
yep.
What is that in today's money?
Let's find out.
Good looking, yeah.
Today, I actually found a YouTube video that was a making of documentary that was filmed at the time of the filming of the movie, and it was really interesting. It was because back then they didn't make that many making of documentaries, at least at the time of filming, because they didn't have DVDs or anything like that. But it was basically like the director George Roy Hill sort of narrating behind the scenes footage for 45 minutes, and he was very candid. Like he talked about how like when he got to a scene that he didn't like, he said something like, "I don't like this scene, and I don't think I ever will." And he says that he had some troubles communicating with the actress Catherine Ross, and it led to a bit of tension on set, but nothing too major. And so, yeah, there was a bunch of interesting stuff in there. I think it was around 45 minutes. But yeah, it is a bit strange that there's not that much making of details, like behind the scenes details about this one. There was something weird in the documentary. There was a shot where Paul Newman didn't want his face in the shot, so he put leaves in his collar to like cover his face with leaves, and I couldn't figure out why he wanted to do that, but he just didn't want his face in that particular shot, so he sort of protested and sort of forced them to film him in a way that didn't include his face.
Maybe he
But
just
yeah.
like had a zit that day.
Yeah, who knows?
I found tons of hilarious information about like the filming, but like not the actual like cinematography part of it. Like nothing about like the camera or like their process on that part. Just like a lot of really fun anecdotes. It seemed like they had a good time.
I guess cinematography in those days was not really a thing that you kept track of. Maybe.
Probably. But speaking of the cinematography, Catherine Ross was dating Conrad Hall, and I think they got married. And I guess she repeatedly tried to man cameras, and so they had to kick her off the set. Because yeah, the cinematographer Conrad Hall was just like, yeah, sure, whatever. This is like, you know, the D camera, I guess. So really the only
Yeah.
information I have is that there were a lot of cameras on set at all points in time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hadn't heard that about Catherine Ross, but yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, there's nothing about that in the making of documentary, but yeah, about like the cinematography in general. Conrad Hall has won 3 Oscars. He actually won his most recent Oscar for The Road to Perdition, which also stars Paul Newman. And he also had another movie with Paul Newman earlier than Butch and Sundance, which was Cool Hand Luke. And he also won an Oscar for American Beauty. So he's had a long career. I mean, he's dead now, but I can't remember when he died, but it was a career spanning like from the 1960s up to the early 2000s, and he was nominated for Oscars and winning Oscars throughout that whole time. So
What'd you say, Tim? That he died in 2003? Is that what you said?
He died in 2003, just after production.
By the way, I actually can't hear Tim at all, and I can't see him, so I don't know when he's talking.
Yeah, hear me or see me.
That's interesting.
Huh.
Hold on.
That's
I'm
weird.
gonna
I can
hold
hear
on.
and see you.
Maybe that will help. I don't know.
Hello, hello, hello.
No, I still can't see anything.
That's
What?
weird.
Strange.
You guys can hear me though.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Check it.
Yes. I can hear you and see you. Weird.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that is strange because I can see the two of you at the top, but not Tim, and I can't hear him either. But
I
What
have
do you-
no idea what's happening
What
there.
did you see?
um,
Well, you guys can relate to what I was saying.
so yeah,
Died
just
in
in case I
2000
interrupt him,
Yeah.
I'm not trying to be rude. I literally can't hear him.
Derek, maybe try to exit out and enter back into the studio. I don't know if maybe loading it in will help any.
Okay.
Because I was the last one to show up, wasn't I?
Yeah.
Yeah, that could have something to
Might
do
have
with it.
something to do
I mean, I don't know why that would, because we all see the same screen, and so like if he's listening on like YouTube, it should be the same. And like I'm gonna go check that now.
Yeah, I'm trying to think what kind of settings I could have like activated on accident that would allow like guests to not see each other. I don't think that's something that you can, I don't know. It's weird.
That's real weird. Especially because yeah, I'm watching the live stream and I have no problems. So
Mm.
who knows?
It worked. Yeah, it worked.
It
Now
worked?
I can see.
Oh, must have been a connectivity issue then.
That's
It's
interesting.
my fault for coming late.
The thing is, you were here early. Everybody was here early, which is actually pretty rare for these.
Well, anyway, Tim, you were saying about his death in
So
2003.
yeah, Connie passed away shortly after production on Road to Perdition wrapped. And as I recall, they dedicated the film to him. one of the all-time great cinematographers, mostly known widely for his work during the American New Wave. In particular, he did a shot in Cold Blood that is particularly famous, particularly among cinematographers. He caught something that nobody was looking for. There's a scene where Robert Blake is looking out a window, and it's an emotional scene, and it's raining on the window. And the way that Connie lit it, he did not intend this, but accidentally, the rain running down the window, the light comes through and makes it look like Robert Blake is crying. It's a very famous shot. If you look it up, there's probably tons of clips of it on YouTube. Really, really sweet man, beloved by everybody. He also shot, he shot a lot of stuff. He famously did, no, I'm sorry, that's Vilmar Sigmund. What he did American Beauty. You can look on Wikipedia what he's done, but he's won 3 Oscars, and just really great. His son is a cinematographer now too, and that's a whole other story. We could just do a meeting on Connie Hall.
Yeah, I do think that it's pretty amazing how well the cinematography of this movie holds up, and like for it being shot in '69, like it looks really good still.
I have nothing but praise for the cinematography. Otherwise, I do think it's a really weird film.
All right, let's talk about it.
So it's part of the reason why I looked up so much about the making of, is because William Goldman just kind of really liked Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and kept looking it up, and then specifically did it as a screenplay because he didn't want to research it more, because he thought if he wrote a book, he would have to do a lot more research and people would check him on it, and he didn't want to do that, so he wrote a screenplay instead.
So is this based, I wasn't sure about this, and I purposely didn't look it up before this call, but was this based on a true story?
Oh. Kind of. I guess at the start of it, it says everything that follows is true, which is a blatant lie. Very little of it's true. What's true is that Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid and Etta Place were real people who did flee to Bolivia. And that is really it. They have, it's interesting. We can talk about that later, but I think the weird thing for this, there's a few things. It feels like it wasn't very strung together as far as a plot. It feels like there were just things that just get left over in places, or they gave up on a specific idea. So the plot doesn't quite do a complete through line. And it feels like it's a series of vignettes of people just having fun.
Yeah.
And also the fact that Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head was written specifically for that scene is the most hilarious thing, because that scene feels out of place and that song feels out of place.
Was it really? Wow.
Yes.
That has nothing to do with it, though.
And every single person who listened to it was like, this makes no sense. It's not raining, and it doesn't fit with what's happening. But the fact that it was written specifically for it is very funny to me.
Yeah.
If you pay attention,
go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to walk over anybody.
Sorry.
I was going to say, if you pay attention to the lyrics, they actually are an excellent description of Butch Cassidy's character as he's portrayed by Newman and written by Goldman. He's the eternal optimist, and all those lyrics, are pretty much describe the character. Anachronisms are common in George Roy Hill's work. He famously uses ragtime music, which was popular 20 years before in The Sting. So The Sting takes place during the Depression in the 30s, but the music that they use as the soundtrack is from the early 10s and 20s and early 20s and late 10s. So Yeah, it's an anachronism, but it also fits into the film. There's a lot of subtext to this film that has to do with the time that it was made, um, and that's true about all literature and all art. You know, particularly if it's historical, if it portrays historical stuff, it still tends to be a reflection of how people are thinking at the time it was made, and Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid is made at a time when we have the big switch over from old Hollywood to new Hollywood. The American New Wave is starting. But Bonnie and Clyde was 1967. Sam Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, which kind of revolutionizes the Western, is 68. And this is 69. So there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, in the country at the time when this takes place. So those anachronisms, in a way, work really well. If if you uh, if you don't, what am I looking for? Um, if you're aware, if you learn why they're there, they make sense. But I don't. You're right. They might not make sense, particularly viewing them today instead of viewing them in 1969. It might be harder to grasp why those things are there.
I think that's completely fair, and I think it's something that I definitely want to look more into. But you did, yeah. Also, Hole in the Wall Gang versus the Wild Bunch. They had to change that specifically because of that movie. In real life, it's the Wild Bunch.
Hmm.
The Hole in the Wall Gang is the name of their gang in this movie.
Yeah.
But they couldn't get the copyright claim because of the Wild Bunch movie came out the year before. And so they had to change the name of their gang in the movie. That's just a fun historical thing.
I mean, that's funny
That's
because
interesting. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
to think that the name of it would be copyrighted just because it was a previous movie when it's based on historical events, quote unquote, and that was the name of the gang.
I don't know if it was necessarily copyrighted. They were worried they were going to step on toes. They
Okay.
were worried that they were going to come after them. And I don't know if it was necessarily a copyright thing specifically, but it was because of that movie. And I read the history of Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy before I watched the movie. So I noticed that immediately, and I was like, wait a second.
It was a politer time in Hollywood when they didn't care about stepping on each other's toes. Or I mean, they were more careful about that.
Yeah.
I do like how the people in these photos are much more proper, like 19th century Western gentleman and lady than was portrayed in the film. Like, they're not cowboys. These guys don't look like cowboys.
I mean, that's just how photos worked for the time, though.
That's true. They could have not dressed like that most of the time.
Well, I mean, remember how they dress when they take the trip to New York, when they do the montage for New York?
That's true.
They do dress up for the time, and even when they're down in Bolivia, when they're in the restaurant, they're dressed like, for lack of a better word, civilized city men. But
I think in the montage they directly recreate the Sundance Kid and Etta Place photo. I also had to look up the montage because I was like, what an interesting choice to make.
Right. I loved that part. I think that's like my favorite part.
And so I had to look it up, and the short answer is it was just too expensive for them to really film anything along those lines. But they tried to ask the Broadway play for Hello Dolly, who was like playing at that time, if they could use a piece of their set for filming some of it, and Hello Dolly said no. And so instead they went with the montage.
This film was going to be released before Hello Dolly. That's why the studio had refused them permission. But he did allow them to shoot the still photos on that set. So they did get to use the set. They just didn't get to film on it.
Okay.
Yeah. George Roy Hill talked about that in the making of thing that I watched on YouTube. He said that they took photos of the actors in costume, and then they edited those photos into actual photos of New York at that time period. But yeah, he did also say that it was like a budgetary thing. They only did that because they couldn't afford to like film full motion of all that stuff going on. But it is a very interesting effect, and like kind of like one of those choices that is done for budgetary reasons, but it turns out pretty good overall.
Yeah, because when you're thinking about like an story or lack of story, like the overall arc of the story as it exists, like that extra stuff of them, you know, trotting around the US is not really it doesn't really matter that much to where it's going. So you don't have to spend a lot of time in those areas. Like the montage worked just fine.
I had a thought, and it jumped out the back of my head and parachuted away.
I can't help.
Yeah, no. So I guess we'll just move along from there.
Something that you said early on, I meant to say something, and we got off onto another topic, but you were talking about Goldman writing the script. And at the time, I believe he was paid $400,000 for the script, and that was the most that had ever been paid for an original script at that point.
That's a lot for back then.
Yeah.
I think I ran the inflation calculator. It was like 2.5 million in today's dollars.
It's 2.8 million in 2019 dollars. I actually like pulled up a list of like facts about it, and that was the exact thing that was up on my screen.
So what was the total budget in current money?
I would actually have to run the inflation on that, but unfortunately, I started doing it, but it seems to just break a little bit.
Too much money.
Too much money.
Because nowadays making a movie for $6 million, that's like ultra low budget. That's like nothing.
Right.
And to think they had a heart attack when what's his name Heaven's Gate. When Heaven's Gate went over to budget, I think it topped out at 40 million. And today we're like 40 million. That's like nothing, but that was the most money that anybody had ever spent on a film at that point. And that was 1978, 79.
So 6 million in 1969 is the same buying power as 51 million today. So
that's still a relatively low price for a film.
Yeah. I also learned through researching this that most of it was filmed in Zion National Park, along with a lot of the routes around there, and you can actually like follow the trail that they did the filming locations on for the start of the movie.
I really enjoy the fact that the story has no through line. Like it makes it seem very realistic. Like, because when you're thinking of like how to write a 3-act script or like, you know, film whatever, you would have those two parts connect. Like we never actually got to see the Indian tracker. We never got to see the guy, you know, the marshal that they were scared of that was after them. But like if you're thinking about like, oh, that's based on tropes that we know from films nowadays. Like in reality, you wouldn't have these interconnected, like they're gonna chase them all the way to Bolivia. Like, okay, probably not.
The thing about choosing not to show Lord Baltimore and Joe LaFleurs, I think one of the reasons that works is because because Butch and Sundance never get to see them. So we see it the way they see it.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, great moment when they make it back to Etta Place's house, and you know, they ask, so was it Lord Baltimore? And she said, yeah, that sounds like his name. And you know, and
Yeah,
Bush
and we're
read
not.
the paper, and it was Joe LaForge and Lord Baltimore coming after them.
Yeah, and do we ever get confirmation as the audience that those are the people that are after them, or is it just that's what they?
That is the confirmation. When they
Okay.
after they jump off the cliff into the water and they make it back to Edda's place. Edda tells him it is, and then he gets Butch looks it up in the paper, and it was Joe LaForge.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
But we never get confirmation if they actually went to Bolivia to search for them, which is accurate because I mean that's his. I assume anyone that's still watching saw the movie, but spoilers.
You should have said that up front.
It's one of those things where, like, oh, if you're having a discussion about a movie, you're probably
Yeah.
going to have.
Probably
But
safe to assume.
that is like the ending of the movie is them assuming that that's who's after them when it is not at the end.
Nope. It's the Bolivian army.
So that part to me makes sense of just like you think these guys are still after you.
Yeah, like really? You really think that those guys are gonna follow you all the way? Okay.
Well, we do see the guy with the white hat, who is presumably Joe LaForge.
Yeah, but we didn't see his face.
But we never do.
No, but they didn't even see his face. So it could have not. It could have just been any guy.
Any guy with a white boater hat.
Yeah, they could have just they just assumed.
They kind of have to. It's life or death.
That's well, literally in the end.
To go back to the history aspect of this and the real people, nobody's actually confirmed how they died. It's assumed that that is actually what happened. That they weren't hired legitimately, but that they robbed a payroll guy in the mountain, and then somebody found the American bandits because of a donkey that had the branding of the company that lost their payroll.
Los banditos Yankees.
Yeah. Yep. Los banditos Yankees. Which took me way longer to figure out than I'd like to admit because I had subtitles on, and if you read the subtitles, it's spelt Y-A-N-Q-I or Q-U-I-S.
That's the Spanish spelling. Yankees.
It's the Spanish spelling, and I never knew that, and so I just was like, oh, this is a normal thing until like I actually like heard them speaking in the Spanish and they said it, and I was like, hold on.
That's how it's written on the wanted poster too. There's two scenes where you see the wanted poster. It says Banditos Yankees.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what platform you guys watched on, but I watched it on Amazon Prime, and it had no translations for the Spanish.
It doesn't have translations for the Spanish.
Is that how so in the original release, they're just speaking Spanish, and nobody knows what they're saying unless you speak Spanish. Huh.
Yep.
Interesting.
Because Butch and Sundance don't speak Spanish either. That's so true. They put the audience in the same position as the protagonists.
Because it's actually really funny if you do speak Spanish and you understand what they're saying. Those exchanges are hilarious. But if you don't speak Spanish, you don't get it.
Yeah, I think all of it is from the view of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. So you're not going to get the other side of it. Why would you as the audience get to understand the Spanish if they don't?
Yeah, you have to know some Spanish, I guess.
From today's perspective, it's an interesting choice because most filmmakers or their producers would stick the subtitles in instead of using it the way that George Roy Hill does.
I know that they had to do a lot of editing for this movie. I mean, not just with like montages and like the colors and changing all of that. One, I guess the original cut was too funny, and they had to recut it.
I mean, the release is pretty funny as it is.
But I imagine it has something to do with that as well, of just like not including subtitles as a part of it.
With
a $6 million budget, I have to assume most of that budget went to locations, and especially how large their locations are.
Well, I assume that is a deliberate choice. Is you know, like Tim was saying, like putting you in the same place as them. But like, yeah, I don't know. I'm curious as to what was cut that made it funnier, because it was already very funny.
My understanding, and this is from memory, is that nothing was actually cut. What happened was they did a screening, um, and Goldman and Hill were there. And according to the way Goldman told the story, was that people were laughing throughout the film. And then they got up and gave it a standing ovation when it was done. And Goldman said afterwards that George was absolutely despondent and upset because they laughed at the film. And he wanted Goldman to cut some scenes in the script.
He
So
didn't realize he'd made a comedy.
um, that's an interesting thing to talk about. But anyhow, they did another screen. No. I forget what it is. They either did another screening and it went better, or they just released it as it was, and it was a big success. Um, it's Paul Newman, when he came on board, he was concerned about playing Butch. He was originally supposed to play Sundance, and he went to George and said, "I don't do comedy." And George said, "You don't have to do comedy. Just do the script, and the comedy will come, from that."
Yeah.
And if you think about, it was interesting because I was watching it again on Saturday night, and it occurred to me, and I was going through my head through the history, and I think it's very possible this is the very first buddy pick. This sets the model for buddy picks. The little funny exchanges between the two of them, and their relationship is all the hallmark of, the modern day. You look at Lethal Weapon, and it's Butch and Sundance.
Yeah, the straight man and the clown.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think this is possibly the first or one of the first comedic buddy movies. And I can think of like one or two more serious movies that kind of had a buddy system, like Stray Dog by Akira Kurosawa, which is a detective story where there are two partners, an old one and a young one, working together. But yeah, I would say like Butch and Sundance were definitely, this movie was definitely like the catalyst for a lot of the 80s buddy comedies and a lot of like just stuff that came after it. So yeah, and also I a long time ago I really got into reading William Goldman's books, because he wrote a ton of books about his life as a screenwriter, and I think his first one and his most famous one was called Adventures in the Screen Trade, and it was a while ago, so I don't remember that many specifics about Butch and Sundance, but I do remember that William Goldman sort of has this attitude where he doesn't think that directors do anything, which sounds a bit like a broad statement. Oh, you've got it? Yeah, Adventures in the Screen Trade. And he wrote a bunch of sequels, I think, to Adventures in the Screen Trade. But he talks a bit about how the directors he's met aren't really as smart as their reputations would say. And he even said this about Stanley Kubrick, which is a bit crazy. But he it seems like he had a bit of a like maybe contentious relationship with George Roy Hill, even though they worked together again on The Great Waldo Pepper. But it seems like William Goldman just didn't respect what directors do, and he thought that the screenwriter was the auteur, not the director.
I mean, that kind of makes sense. as
He
like
was,
from a writer's point of view of like not seeing like that side of it. Um, but I also think that most directors who are auteurs are also the screenwriters. So it's really like which direction are you going with that? Because for me, I don't know how you like divvy up um like how you think about it, but for me, the writer writes the whole thing. They're responsible for the story. The director is in charge of the actors, and the
Well, the direct
cinematographer is in charge of the look and like the
yeah,
scenes.
the director is in charge of also like the flow, and a lot of directors
Mhm.
write their shot lists and things like that. So they have a lot of creative control over not just the actors, but like the flow and feel of the movie.
Yeah.
But um, yeah, I mean, I think it's really funny because I've never looked at a film from only the writer's perspective because I've always been on all sides. Like I've acted, I've directed, I've written, I've done all the stuff. And so like it's hard for yeah, I guess that is how
It's
someone who only does the writing would see it.
it's also hard to tell the difference between bad writing and bad acting. Like just in general, because when I do like how I'm rating a movie, it's like how is the writing and the story and how is the acting is two separate things, but if the acting is bad, oftentimes the writing sounds bad.
Well,
So
a bad
it's something
actor
that's like
can
all
yeah, a bad actor can break any
yes.
any scene. Like I'm thinking specifically from this movie in the very beginning. Like the writing in this movie is excellent. But like in the very beginning when they're in the gambling hall or in the saloon and they're fighting over the poker hand or whatever and the guy who's reading the dialogue opposite um Robert Redford is just not delivering. He's like, "Well, you're going to leave the money and you're going to get up and go."
Yeah.
And that
And then immediately after that is like the sheriff talking in town to people, and it's also just like very monotonous. And I distinctly remember looking at Ryan and going, none of these people want to be here, huh?
they are not actors. Whoever they got to deliver those lines are not actors.
well, the marshal is the great Kenneth Mars, who I think most people will recognize as the
Oh, he was great. He was
yeah,
excellent.
Yeah.
yeah. So okay, so I don't need to explain who he is. The guy in the saloon is Donnelly Rhodes, who was a character actor, and people from my generation mostly remember him as Dutch on the TV series Soap. Um, and then also in that scene, but he doesn't actually show his face, as Sam Elliott. It was one of
Yep.
Sam Elliott's first on-screen jobs. I always thought that Donnelly Rhodes' line reading in that is fine. It's a very
It's just very dry and flat.
it's a very tight scene, you know, and I think because Redford's line readings are flat and yet so interesting in the way that he delivers them, and particularly what dialogue Goldman has chosen to give him, um, make it more fascinating. And I don't know. I never really thought that. I never thought that the other guy's dialogue was. I always thought it was perfect for the scene, but that's just
I
me.
it made me laugh
Um,
on his delivery. Maybe that was the point.
on on Goldman and George Roy Hill, I didn't know that about that they had issues back then, but I know that he would later say that George Roy Hill was one of the finest directors that he had ever worked with. Um, and then to the whole director who is, I like to think of the writer as the writer does the recipe and the director is the chef.
Oh my gosh, I love this poster. This is great. Paul Newman is Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid is Robert Redford.
I think I have one where I put them side by side and I can bring that back
Oh yeah.
up.
Not that it matters, but most of it is true.
The original the first drafts of the script were entitled "The Sundance Kid and Butch Cassidy."
Yes. And I think they switched it around and there was a lot of interesting things. It's sounds like the filming of this was hilarious. But
Steve
I did see
McQueen-
that.
Steve McQueen was originally attached opposite Paul Newman.
I had heard that, yeah.
And he didn't want second billing. So he
Yeah.
rejected it. And then they switched it around anyways.
Well, what's his name? The producer, not Daryl Zanuck, but David Brown. David Brown said that I think it was David Brown who said this. He said what we did was we took a globe and we divided it in half, and we said, okay, over here it will be Steve McQueen and Paul Newman, and over here it will be Paul Newman and Steve McQueen. That Steve McQueen was notorious for shit like that. He did it again with Newman on the Towering Inferno, and they actually split it up like that. As I recall, they did it again where they did this thing where McQueen's name was up here and Newman's was up here or some shit like that. But McQueen was notorious for that kind of shit.
The other really fun thing that I learned about the filming of this was that one, Robert Redford did his own stunts, which I guess Paul Newman did not like. Not because he was overshadowed, but because he thought something bad was going to happen. But Paul Newman had a stunt person who practiced that entire bike scene and then got to set and then couldn't get the bike to stay up while doing the stunts on the bike. And so Paul Newman just did them.
Wow. Okay.
And that is why he does the stunts. And I feel like I can't imagine that scene without seeing his face.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been the same.
I still think that scene's weird. It also makes their relationship just very strange. Just like for the three of them.
Yeah. They're basically a throuple.
They're a throuple.
Newman many years later, or not Newman, Redford many years later talked about the stunt thing. And he said that Paul was right. And he said, but I was just very immature at the time. And it was fun. And I was excited to be able to do this stuff. And I believe he does do the jumping on the train sequence. If there are any other stunt sequences with him, I think he let the stuntman do it. But yeah, Newman was very concerned that it would fuck up the film if Redford got injured on the set.
Well, that's fair.
Yeah. I mean, outside of the train stunt, there's really just the cliff jumping. Which I will say, even when I was like watching it, I was like, one of those people has jumped off a cliff before, and the other one, I'm not sure. Just based on their body positioning as they jumped.
Yeah, the cliff jumping is interesting because I saw that in the behind the scenes video, and it's apparently like the cliff is just a painting on glass in front of the camera. And so it's really, they had the people jump off of a crane that was placed high up in the air. So the jump is real. It's just that the cliff, the cliff wasn't there to make it safe. So they wouldn't like bang
that makes sense.
against the cliff.
That makes sense.
Especially with the fact that Robert Redford did it himself. I can understand why they wouldn't want him to jump off an actual cliff.
Yeah, I'm interested in this making of video if you have a link for it, either that or I'm sure that I can search a little deeper. I didn't search very hard, but I did look for one.
Yeah, I think I can find a link. Let's see.
Because like a lot of the scenes for the chase before that are fascinating to me because some of them are like stills where they just like took a shot and just like it's still for a while, but like also like the lens is super long and like zooming in on those things was fascinating to me. And also the sky looked weird, and so it's nice that you like talked about like they put a painting in front of it, because there were multiple times where I was like, I'm not sure if that's like a painting or not, and like there were like little features in the background that could have been somebody putting something up to.
I'm sure there were some camera tricks like that to make it look a
Yeah.
certain way.
I had a huge argument with Ryan about it as I was watching the movie because I was like, I was very confused. And he was like, "About what?"
Okay, I have to ask you guys. The first time I saw this movie, I hated the end. What do you guys think of the end?
It's perfect.
Yeah, I like it. I think it's interesting to watch like the trends in movies. And so I think, I mean, Bonnie and Clyde came before this, and that also has like an ending where the characters die. And I think,
But you don't see it.
And
yeah,
Bonnie and
that's true.
Clyde,
In
Joe.
this one, it's just a photograph.
Yeah.
But yeah, there were also like the French New Wave movie 400 Blows that sort of ends on a still frame. But what I was going to say is that like throughout the 70s, it became mainstream to have depressing endings, basically. And then Rocky sort of changed it a little bit by having the main character lose but still win morally or whatever. And that kind of flipped Hollywood back to making happy endings. But overall, well, I mean, it's hard to see this ending in context because I wasn't alive then, and so I don't know what effect it would have had on me. But yeah, overall, I like it, and it's interesting because in the scene right before they run outside, where they're just talking to each other about Australia,
Mhm.
they don't mention being wounded. They don't mention anything about like their current survival, basically, and it's all kind of subtext, I guess, that they're just like about to
Screwed.
run out to their deaths.
Yeah.
I thought that scene was very good, and
Yeah.
then yeah, the photograph itself is interesting. I could see how people wouldn't like it, and I think I like it overall.
I like it now. I think back then I was a little less refined in my my film taste. But now I think it works really well with the way that it kind of leaves you hanging, but you know they died. Like there's no way around it really. They
I
couldn't have
think
survived that.
yeah, it plays into the whole like you see things from their point of view. In fact,
Huh?
I think watching all of the people come in is like one of the first times at the very end. It's one of the few times where like you see things that they aren't actually a part of.
Hmm.
It's kind of interesting that this poster right here shows the ending. Like that's the
I
end.
also,
Usually,
again, not to
yeah.
keep bringing up the bicycle scene that I just don't understand why it was there, but that's also on the poster.
Yeah.
I think that's my main thing is like I'm still questioning it. Um,
Yeah,
but
watching it this time, I did kind of think that the bicycle scene went on too long, and his jokes were a little bit cringy to me. But maybe I don't know, they were like dad jokes, and
I loved
I,
it. I love the
yeah, I
way
don't know.
that Butch Cassidy's character comes across in this movie. I think it's very endearing that he's a dad joking leader of an outlaw gang. Like it just makes him so lovable.
yeah.
Yeah, it
Um,
is interesting, and it is kind of like a revisionist Western in that way to like make these two outlaws. I don't know their history, like the history of the actual people, so I don't know how many people they killed or like if they were horrible outlaws or if they um, were good outlaws or whatever. But yeah, it is. Yeah, I think that is a good choice to like make them jokey friends instead of cold-blooded killers, which is kind of what the Wild Bunch did the year before. Although that's not really about Butch and Sundance, so it's weird that it has the title The Wild Bunch. But anyway,
I do think it's interesting, Tim, that you pointed out that Paul Newman said that he couldn't do comedy because his comedic timing in this movie is just spot on.
Yeah. I think one of the important things about, and I talked about before about how pieces of art, literature, film are portrayals of the time in which they're made. And one of the things that I think about when I watch this film, it's a lot of westerns around that time start addressing the death of the West, and this is one of the first ones that address that, where modern times start to bump into the traditional Western idea of what American was. But I think the other thing that comes across here, and one of the reasons that we're so empathetic to Butch and Sundance, is that it's got an anti-capitalistic facet to it.
Yeah.
Butch and Sundance are the people, and they're going up against E.J. Harriman, a big banker. Boo, bankers. So
Yeah.
uh,
Well, and
so
the time. Sorry.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say the time in which the film takes place is very similar to the time that we're living through now, in which we're experiencing this resurgence of the robber baron concept. And that was exactly the time back then. Like you could go get a job, but like a lot of good it's going to do you. Like when they're in Bolivia and the guy's like, I can't really even pay you. Like, yeah, I could give you a job, but what am I going to pay you with? The money that keeps getting stolen?
Yeah.
So.
The Wild Bunch is an interesting case because it, and we should talk about this too, because I forget, one of you mentioned that, it was Beckett, about how there doesn't seem to be really a plot here. And it's interesting to bookend this with the film that Hill and Newman and Redford did together, The Sting, because that's all about the plot. Whereas this film is really about the characters and the relationship between those characters. So there is a broader plot. It's the story of them being hunted down, really, but it's really about us getting intimate with who these two guys are and how they relate to each other and how they relate to the world. Whereas, and Redford was initially concerned about doing The Sting because he didn't want to do explore those same ideas that they already explored in this film. So he initially turned it down, and I think it was Newman who went and explained to him that, well, it's really not like Butch and Sundance. What this is the old master passing down his skills to the young guy, the young up-and-comer. So it's kind of like an apprenticeship thing. And once Newman explained that to Redford's like, oh, okay, yeah, we can do that. It's interesting to hear Redford talk about this period in his career. If you go see in the Actors Studio, the interview with Robert Redford is phenomenal and wide-ranging. They cover his entire career, and what you come to realize is Redford had a very good idea of what he wanted to do as an actor and how he wanted to tell stories and explore stories. And he's always chosen his projects based on, okay, have I done this before? If I've done it before, then no, I'm not going to do this again. I want to go tell other stories. But if you get a chance to see that in the Actors Studio with Redford, it's truly fascinating to see him cover, literally 50 years of a career in film.
How old were both of them when they shot this?
Newman's 12 years older, I think, than Redford. So I think Newman's in his 30s and Redford is in his 20s.
Yeah, Paul Newman had been in movies, like he had been a star for a while before this. Like he was in Cool Hand Luke, and yeah, I can't remember what he did in the 50s, but I think this was one of Robert Redford's first movies, even though on his IMDb, it looks like he had done a bunch of TV before this. But yeah, speaking of Redford, it is also interesting how he named his film festival after this movie, the Sundance Film Festival, and also named his chain of movie theaters that I don't know if it's around anymore, but for a while he had a chain of movie theaters called the Sundance Theaters. So I think this movie really captured what he wanted to do, like to be independent and to be like an artist and like free from like money considerations mostly, I think. Um, but yeah, yeah, this movie is also just interesting from that perspective of like influencing the Sundance Film Festival and stuff like that.
Redford grew up a city boy. He grew up in Van Nuys, California. And I think his family originally came from Illinois or something like that. And he talks about it somewhere, I don't know where, but this film is when he fell in love with that part of the country. He fell in love with the way it looked, and so that's how all the Sundance stuff came about.
I went to Sundance. We did a road trip my senior year of high school, and we went to the Sundance Film Festival. It was a really fun trip.
All right, so we have passed the hour mark, so I do want to wrap things up, but I also want to say that I love Woodcock, the guy from the train. Huge fan
Yes.
of him.
Mr.
And I
E.J.
guess
Harris trusted me with his money.
I we haven't brought him up, and I was like, you know what? I think that's my favorite character.
He is the quintessential corporate drone.
But also I love that he starts saying it again, and then he's just like, Butch, how you doing?
Well, you got in so easy last time, Butch. I had to change it up on you.
You know, Butch, if
That
it
was
was
a great
my
scene.
money, there's nobody who I would rather have rob me.
Yeah. He was a great character.
Yeah. They're great. There's so many great character moments in this. The scene just before the knife fight, where News Carver is reading the story of one of their robberies, and Butch tells him to stop, and he's not. No, I
haven't got a good
I
part.
want to
Yeah.
get to my favorite part. I love reading my name in the paper, Butch.
That was great.
And Richard Keel as Logan. That whole fight scene. Who had ever done a fight scene like that? It was very, very unique.
Yeah.
And then, of course, my favorite line, think you used enough dynamite there, Butch?
It's a great movie. Those of you out there in internet land, if you haven't seen it, I don't know why you'd be watching this far if you haven't, but you should go watch it.
Absolutely, and I will pick the next movie on Saturday. So I haven't decided what it's going to be yet, so absolutely give me some suggestions.
Yeah. Send in your submissions. I think all of the ones on the list are from me so far. So if you guys have any suggestions, please submit them.
I'll kick in a few.
Thank you. Because right now it's just like what me and Beckett have like thought it would be fun to watch.
Well, we want
This wasn't on the list. This was actually from Ryan, kind of. He was like, I want something from this time frame, and so I was like on HBO Max.
Well,
just,
why
like,
isn't
trying to
he
find it.
here then?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Well, I was happily surprised that you chose this one because it is one of my favorite films.
I'm glad that I finally got to watch it after, but I do think I need to go back through and like think about the time frame and like the subtext on it, because for me this was a very strange movie.
Yeah.
It was absolutely gorgeous, and I love the contrast and the way that it was shot, and the framing on it was amazing, and I had a fun time watching it, but I was very confused about the artistic choices. So
yeah, as I said, if you look at all films, they're definitely a portrait of much of the time they're made, as the time they're portraying. But it's particularly important during when you're watching films of the American New Wave, because there's so much commentary on politics, particularly the Vietnam War.
Yes.
The assassination of JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, all those things that are happening at the tail end of the 60s and the beginning in the 70s play into the plots of a lot of these films, at the very least as subtext, if nothing else.
Yeah, it's very true. And art has always been that way. Like art very often has commentary on the social, climate of the day. So I think it's extra funny when conservatives are always complaining about how everything's gone woke and it wasn't like this before. Okay.
So
Have you not watched movies before?
yeah, it's funny that you brought up like the whole Vietnam War thing because you said it and I immediately thought of Kelly's Heroes, which came out in 1970. And the first time I watched it, I was like, this is weird because it's a World War II movie, but all their war tactics are Vietnam War specific.
One of the
Because
most interesting films in that regard is MASH, because everybody, it takes place during the Korean War, but everybody was aware that it was about Vietnam.
Yeah.
Nobody
Yeah.
missed that fact.
nobody's hiding it.
Yeah.
But anyways, I think I'm going to wrap it up. So thank you guys for joining this discussion with me, and I hope to discuss more movies with you guys in the future.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having us.
Have a great night, everyone.